In this demonstration, I will be using PowerShell to create a VPC, a virtual private cloud. Let's start first, though, here in the console for one moment. What I'd like to do is jump into the VPC management console. When we're in the GUI, if we go to create a VPC, we get the option to create only the VPC resource itself, or we can choose VPC and more, which of course would include things like creating subnets, even creating related items like a route table, a DHCP option set. So that means then that in PowerShell, if you want to create subnets, if you want to create route tables, that would be a separate set of PowerShell commands to do that beyond creating the VPC. So in this particular case, we will create a VPC and a subnet within that VPC. Bear in mind that when you are doing this, when you're creating a VPC, you are setting a CIDR block for IPv4, which means you're using the slash and the number of bits in the mask as the notation, following the network address, but you can create IPv4 CIDR blocks, so plural, implying more than one. You can add them later if you want, and the same goes for IPv6. You can add an Amazon-provided IPv6 CIDR block as well if you're going to be using IPv6 for instances deployed in subnets within the VPC. Okay, so if we go to the VPCs view then, let's see, we've got a couple here. Let's create a VPC that we will name VPC3. Okay, so here I'm in PowerShell on a Windows host where the AWS tools for PowerShell have been installed. I'm going to run get-command and I'm going to use wildcard asterisks for VPC. Let's find out what the commandlets are called related to working with this. Okay, we get a large returned list where one of the things that jumps out here is the new -ec2 VPC commandlet. That would seem to be the PowerShell commandlet that would create a new virtual private cloud. Indeed it is. So we're going to go with that. I'm going to issue the new -ec2 VPC commandlet, and I'm going to use the -CIDR, that's CIDR block parameter. And let's say I want to create the 13.0.0.0/16 network. 16 bits in the mask in this particular case means that 13.0 are the network address. So any subnets I create in this VPC will need to fall under that range. In other words, the subnet CIDR blocks will have to be at least 13.0. Okay, that's fine. Let's press enter. Okay, so it's in the midst of creating this. The state is pending. Notice that there's a DHCP option set ID that was automatically associated. If I were to run the get-ec2 VPC commandlet, it would return the details for my existing VPCs, of which I have a number of them. One of which is the one we just created with the 13.0 network. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to tag my VPC. I want to call it VPC3. What we'll do is use the up arrow key once again to go back to get ec2 VPC, because what I really should do here is copy the VPC ID. I'm going to need that. And that's usually the case when you want to manipulate a resource here in PowerShell. So I'm going to run the new -ec2 tag commandlet -resource ID. And here I'll paste in the ID that we just copied for the VPC. That's the resource I want to modify in terms of adding a tag. So -tag and then open curly brace, key equals, and in quotes, name, close quote, semicolon, value equals, and in quotes again, double quotes to be specific, I'll put in VPC3, close the double quotes, and close the curly bracket and press enter. Now here in the console, in the Your VPCs view, I'm just going to go ahead and click the refresh button. And notice that we do have VPC3 here. And then if I click the link to open up its details, it's showing that it's associated with the DHCP option set, as well as a route table and a network ACL. All of that can be changed. And of course, notice the 13.0 CIDR block that was assigned for that VPC. So the next thing I'd like to do is create a subnet associated with that VPC. For that, I'll run new -ec2 subnet -VPC ID. A subnet needs to be associated with the VPC. I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the ID for the VPC we created previously. Then I have to use the -cider block parameter. And this is where I need to make sure that I specify something that is at least under 13.0 for that VPC. Let's say I put in something incorrect, like 13.2.1.0/24 bits in the mask. Let's see what we get. Okay, well, it tells us quite clearly that that cider is invalid. Let's use the up arrow key to bring up that command and let's correct it. We know we have to have at least 13.0. Okay, well, now we do, and then .1 for /24. In this particular case, that means the first 3 octets identify the network. It doesn't have to be 24 bits long, but that's what I'm going to do here. This time we don't receive an error message. Instead, we get some returned output that implies or indicates that that subnet creation completed successfully. If I were to run get-ec2 subnet and press enter, the last one in our list here is actually for the cider range that we just specified. Okay, so the last thing I think I'll do here is tag that subnet. For that, I'm going to need to copy the subnet ID. So I'll do that. Clear the screen, and I'll run new -ec2 tag -resource ID. I'll paste in my subnet ID -tag and then space at open curly brace key equals in quotes name semicolon value equals and in quotes let's call it subnet 3. Close curly brace, enter. So back here in the console, if I go to subnets on the left, there is subnet 3. If we click on it to open up its details, of course, we'll be able to verify that the IPv4 cider matches what we configured at the command line.